In the quiet corners of ordinary life, wealth moves unseen. The person seated beside you at the coffee shop, fingers wrapped around a simple ceramic mug, may possess 8 figures in assets while wearing decade-old sneakers. True wealth, it seems, has mastered the ancient art of invisibility, not through deception, but through a profound understanding of what matters and what merely appears to matter. There exist 7 telltale signatures that betray the presence of genuine prosperity, subtle markers visible only to those who know where to look. More importantly, these patterns represent not merely the habits of the wealthy, but the very architecture of wealth creation itself. To adopt them is to begin speaking the silent language of lasting abundance. The first sign emerges in what remains unspoken. Those who have traversed the long road to substantial wealth have learned to avoid 3 conversational territories with near religious devotion: earnings, expensive acquisitions, and excess. These constitute what might be called the 3 E's, the trinity of topics that immediately distinguish the genuinely prosperous from those merely performing prosperity. Consider the nature of those who constantly discuss their income. There exists within such proclamations an unspoken desperation, a psychological need for external validation that genuine wealth has long since transcended. The truly wealthy carry a quiet knowing, an internal assurance that requires no audience. They have nothing to prove because proof itself has become irrelevant. The money exists whether acknowledged or not, and this certainty liberates them from the exhausting theater of financial peacocking. Similarly, while social media fills with images of designer acquisitions and luxury timepieces, the genuinely wealthy remain conspicuously absent from this digital parade. When someone cannot stop discussing the cost of their vehicle or the expense of their vacation, they reveal something profound. They have stretched their resources to their breaking point to afford these symbols, and now must extract maximum social value from each dollar spent. The purchase price must be recouped not in utility, but in attention, in likes, in the envious glances of others. The third E, excess, proves perhaps most revealing. Authentic wealth understands that life's truest luxuries exist not in ostentation, but in optionality, in convenience, in the radical freedom to choose how one's hours unfold. The flashy accumulation of status symbols represents not abundance, but its opposite: a poverty of imagination, a failure to grasp what money can truly purchase when wielded with wisdom rather than wielded for witnesses. This principle carries practical implications beyond mere observation. The energy one might expend on maintaining appearances, on cultivating an image of success, represents energy diverted from building actual net worth. Every dollar spent on impressing strangers is a dollar that cannot compound, cannot work, cannot multiply in the silent mathematics of investment. The secretly wealthy have solved this equation by removing themselves from it entirely. The second signature of hidden prosperity appears in parking lots and driveways across neighborhoods where prosperity hides in plain sight. The genuinely wealthy drive reliable vehicles between 5 and 10 years old, completely paid for, chosen not for their statement, but for their utility. You will not find them in the gleaming showrooms of luxury dealerships, financing vehicles that begin losing value the moment they leave the lot. This choice reflects a sophisticated understanding of depreciation's brutal mathematics. A car payment of $500 to $800 monthly represents not merely an expense, but an opportunity cost, $6,000 to nearly $10,000 annually, that could instead enter the kingdom of compound returns. Over a decade, accounting for market growth, this difference approaches or exceeds $100,000. The wealthy have learned to see every purchase not as an isolated transaction, but as a choice between present appearance and future abundance. The depreciation curve itself tells a revealing story. While different vehicles follow different trajectories, a universal pattern emerges around the 5-year mark. The steep decline flattens. The dramatic value loss slows. Most of the financial damage has already occurred. The sweet spot for value-conscious purchases appears somewhere between 3 and 5 years of age, around 30,000 miles. Old enough that depreciation's worst violence has passed, young enough that reliability remains high. But those seeking true invisibility, those who understand that flying below radar enables freedom, often push further. They choose vehicles even older, extracting the maximum value from every dollar, allowing their wealth to accumulate in investment accounts rather than evaporating on depreciating assets. The secretly wealthy grasp a truth that eludes most. A car represents transportation. From point A to point B, nothing more. They would rather be wealthy than appear wealthy, would rather own their financial life than owe their lifestyle to creditors. The third marker of hidden wealth appears not in what is purchased, but in the unusual nature of those purchases. While others spend on visible status symbols, the genuinely prosperous allocate resources toward acquisitions that remain largely invisible, things that normal observers would never consider, never notice, never understand. Time stands foremost among these uncommon investments. The wealthy recognize time as the only truly finite resource, the one commodity that cannot be manufactured or recovered once spent. Consequently, they will spend disproportionate sums to reclaim hours, to purchase freedom from tedium, to eliminate the friction between desire and action. Private aviation eliminates security theater and boarding rituals. Personal chefs handle procurement and preparation, returning precious hours each week. Household help removes the burden of maintenance, freeing attention for pursuits that matter. The crucial element here: an outside observer would never know these services exist unless granted unusual access to the wealthy person's daily rhythms. These are not purchases announced on social media or mentioned at cocktail parties. They operate in silence, in the background, invisible infrastructure supporting a life of deliberate focus. Another category of uncommon spending emerges in rare collectibles: fine art, vintage wines, sports memorabilia, even trading cards from one's youth. Rather than displaying wealth through mass-market luxury goods that thousands possess, the genuinely prosperous seek items marked by scarcity, by uniqueness, by the inability of others to acquire them regardless of resources. This reflects fundamental human psychology. Once basic needs find satisfaction, the drive shifts from mere possession to differentiation, from having enough to having what others cannot. This represents not vanity, but a deeper truth about human nature. We seek not merely comfort, but distinction, not merely security, but specialness. The wealthy have the resources to pursue this drive through channels unavailable to most, collecting not for investment returns, but for the satisfaction of owning what is scarce, what is rare, what cannot be replicated. The fourth sign manifests in an acute awareness of perception, a sophisticated understanding that wealth generates envy as naturally as flame produces heat. Even one's closest friends, genuinely happy for success 99% of the time, harbor that small, involuntary thought: why not me? Could I have what they possess? This is not malice, but human nature, the inevitable comparison that consciousness makes when confronted with disparity. To navigate this reality, the wealthy have learned protective concealment. They avoid any conversation that might allow others to deduce their financial position through logical inference. Ask about net worth, and the response arrives wrapped in deflection. I've done pretty well for myself. We're comfortable. I'm certainly not the richest person I know. This last phrase proves particularly illuminating. As one climbs the wealth ladder, comparison never ceases. There always exists someone with more, someone higher on whatever scale one uses for measurement. Those worth hundreds of millions describe themselves as poor compared to billionaire friends. Those on the Forbes 400 list still glance upward at those ranked higher, still feel the subtle sting of inadequacy that comparison breeds. Perhaps only a handful of individuals on Earth have escaped this psychological trap, and even that seems doubtful. But image management serves purposes beyond mere social comfort. Visible wealth draws unwanted attention, creates security concerns, invites resentment that can metastasize into genuine danger. The flashy advertisement of prosperity transforms the advertiser into a target. Far better to remain invisible, to let wealth work in silence while one moves through the world unburdened by the complications that visibility creates. Sign 5 emerges in a curious contradiction. The wealthy will spend 30 minutes researching a $20 purchase while spending $15,000 on a necessary repair without hesitation. They scrutinize small acquisitions with scholarly attention, reading reviews, watching comparison videos, seeking optimal value, then write large checks for urgent needs with barely a second thought. The distinction lies in necessity versus desire, need versus want. Small purchases typically involve discretionary spending across categories with numerous options. A portable power bank, for instance, exists in dozens of variations, all functionally similar, distinguished only by marginal differences in quality and cost. The wealthy understand that making optimal choices across hundreds of such small decisions annually compounds into substantial savings. Large necessary expenditures, conversely, allow little room for optimization. A failing roof demands replacement regardless of one's feelings about the cost. When necessity calls, particularly urgent necessity, the wealthy act decisively, understanding that delay only compounds expense. This pattern often reflects the ingrained habits of the self-made wealthy, those who built their prosperity through countless small decisions repeated consistently over decades. They cannot help but optimize, cannot resist seeking value, cannot turn off the mental machinery that analyzes cost versus benefit, even when their bank balance could absorb any expense without notice. The habit that built the wealth continues operating long after the wealth no longer needs building. The sixth signature appears in patience, in the mastery of delayed gratification that separates wealth builders from wealth spenders. While most purchase impulsively, the wealthy research for months, wait for optimal pricing, or ultimately decide the item never truly mattered. They understand that most sales are fictional. Arbitrary discounts from arbitrary prices set by suppliers hoping to manufacture urgency. Wait long enough, and nearly everything eventually appears on clearance. This requires not merely financial discipline, but psychological sophistication. The wealthy can distinguish between genuine desire and manufactured want, between lasting value and temporary impulse. They might wait not days, but weeks or months before major purchases, using time as a filter that removes everything ephemeral, everything performance-driven, everything that seemed important in the moment, but lacks enduring significance. The practice extends beyond mere purchasing to encompass a broader life philosophy. Delayed gratification, the ability to sacrifice present pleasure for future advantage, stands as perhaps the most reliable predictor of eventual prosperity. Most people struggle to delay gratification for 24 hours. The wealthy have trained themselves to wait years, even decades, allowing their resources to compound while others consume. This patience applies not only to sales, but to investments, to career moves, to business decisions, to every arena where time can be traded for advantage. The secretly wealthy have learned that time itself is a form of leverage, that waiting costs nothing but often yields everything. The seventh and final sign appears in residential choices that seem almost perverse in their modesty. While most stretch themselves financially to occupy the largest house they can theoretically afford, the wealthy deliberately choose homes well below their capacity, properties that seem almost too small, too plain, too unremarkable for someone with their resources. This choice reflects strategic thinking about the cascading costs of lifestyle inflation. A large house requires not just mortgage payments, but decoration, professional cleaning, landscaping, pool maintenance, and endless additional expenditures that feed themselves. More troubling, a large house creates psychological lock-in. The owner cannot downsize without admitting defeat, without revealing to neighbors and friends that appearances were illusions, that the grand life proved unsustainable. The wealthy who choose modest homes avoid this trap entirely. They own properties outright or carry easily managed mortgages, living mortgage-free while never announcing this fact, never drawing attention to their financial position. This creates tremendous freedom, the freedom to ignore comparison, to make decisions based on preference rather than performance, to live authentically rather than living for audience. There exists a beautiful paradox in the relationship between wealth and lifestyle. The progression might be mapped as 3 levels. First, cutting one's own grass because money is scarce. Second, paying others to cut the grass because money has arrived. Third, cutting one's own grass again because wealth has brought so much freedom and time that the simple pleasure of the task can be rediscovered. The person at level 3, appearing indistinguishable from the person at level 1, possesses everything while needing to prove nothing. True wealth, then, moves through the world wearing camouflage, not from shame, but from wisdom. It understands that happiness flows not from recognition, but from freedom, not from appearance, but from substance, not from what others see, but from what one knows. The 7 signs outlined here represent not parlor tricks for identifying wealthy neighbors, but rather a philosophical framework for building wealth oneself. To avoid the 3 E's is to redirect energy from performance to building. To drive old cars is to channel thousands toward investment rather than depreciation. To spend on uncommon things is to purchase what truly matters rather than what merely signals. To manage image is to protect freedom and safety. To scrutinize small purchases is to honor the details that compound into fortunes. To master waiting is to embrace the delayed gratification that creates abundance. To live modestly is to avoid the trap of lifestyle inflation that transforms wealth into mere cash flow. Wealth accumulated quietly, stewarded wisely, and worn invisibly represents not merely financial success, but philosophical sophistication. The understanding that life's deepest satisfactions rarely announce themselves, that true luxury exists in optionality rather than ostentation, that the richest life might be indistinguishable from a simple one to anyone who cannot see beneath surfaces. The secretly wealthy understand what others miss, that money serves best when it buys not things but freedom, not status but optionality, not appearance but substance. In their silence lies their wisdom, and in their invisibility lies their wealth.